Tonight, hostage talks intensify.
Bring them home now.
The plight of the captives held by Hamas hangs in the balance.
And
we are now working in over a dozen locations across Israel.
Help for one of the hardest hit communities in the October 7th terror attacks.
Plus, the senator blocking military promotions over abortion. Talks to CBN News.
I hate to have to hold these people kind of a hostage, but the American people deserve better than this.
Meanwhile, at the dinner table, the cost of this year's Thanksgiving.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
Hope for a breakthrough in hostage talks. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And good evening in Washington. I'm Jenna Browder. A deal to release dozens of hostages in Gaza in exchange for a 3 to 5 day pause in fighting in Israel's war against Hamas. Now the latest hope for some 240 captives held by the terror group.
Those negotiations come as Israel announces the discovery of the body of an elderly woman Hamas kidnapped on October 7th. Israeli troops uncovered the remains in a building near Al-Shifa Hospital after taking control of Gaza's largest medical center. The body was transferred back to Israeli territory. Military equipment and weapons like those shown in this video released by Israel Defense Forces were also found in the same building as the hostage remains. The tentative deal, reportedly in the works between Israel and Hamas, would exchange humanitarian aid and the release of women and children held in Israeli prisons for the release of at least 50 women and children held by the terrorist network.
I'm working on how I can be helpful in getting the hostages released.
We've got folks on the ground. We've been talking to them. Our negotiators are talking to their negotiators, and we're working on this really, really hard. I don't have an announcement to make today, but as the president said yesterday, we're hopeful that we can actually get a good result here.
Well, let's bring in senior international correspondent for CBN News, George Thomas, who just returned stateside after spending weeks on the ground in Israel. Great reporting there, George, and welcome to Faith Nation. So Israel Defense Forces are pointing to what some in the media have described as scant or underwhelming evidence of a Hamas command center or tunnel networks at Al-Shifa Hospital. George, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to give the IDF a few hours, a few days ahead. This is, as you mentioned, the Gaza Strip's largest hospital. It's going to take some time. Keep in mind also, John, that Hamas and the Islamic Palestinian Jihad, they have in essence been the law enforcement in the Gaza Strip since 2015. So would you find weapons, body armor, and other pieces of military equipment in the hospital? Absolutely. Would you find them in other hospitals? Sure. So I think in the initial 24, 48 hours, we haven't seen the kinds of, the kind of images that the IDF released 2 weeks ago, showing an animated image of the underground, the tunnel structure. We haven't seen that yet. It's going to take some time. I think, in the last few hours, we saw new video emerging from the IDF showing a tunnel very close to the Al-Shifa Hospital. So I say give it some time, and I think the evidence will reveal itself.
George, Israel confirmed the identity of the remains of a hostage recovered near Al-Shifa Hospital, a 65-year-old mother of 5 who worked with kindergarten kids. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he's only considering a ceasefire if all hostages are freed. How does this development change things?
Well, I think this is the first time really in more than a month that we are seeing some tremendous traction movement on the issue of the plight of those hostages. The Hamas saying that we will release 50 women and children, and in exchange Hamas wants 50 women and children to be released from Israeli prisons. The Qataris, the Egyptians, the Americans, the Israelis are all involved. I think we could see that potentially happen. Israeli Prime Minister just in the last few hours saying that there is some indication that the hostages were being held at Al-Shifa. Wouldn't surprise me. Why? Because maybe there were so many that were injured. They needed to be in close proximity to medical facilities. So that doesn't surprise me. But this is tremendous news. The first time really in more than a month that we've seen some great traction as as it relates to the plight of these hostages. So let's see what happens in the next few days.
George, a Palestinian telecom company confirmed reporting of a total communication blackout due to the Gaza Strip's lack of access to fuel. And then you have things like, this TikTok letter that had to be removed, written by Osama bin Laden more than 20 years ago that went viral. It was an openly anti-Semitic screed that blamed Jews for 9/11 and said America would pay for its arrogance concerning Palestine with, quote, the blood of Christians. I want to ask you, how concerned are you about future generations of young people who are caught up in the conflict, others in the Middle East region, and even here, the longer this drags on, will it stoke anti-Israel and anti-U.S. sentiment?
Yeah, it absolutely will. I mean, look what happened 20 years ago, what Osama bin Laden did to 3,000 plus Americans, and the kind of destruction that came about since 9/11. Look, I think there's a generation of young people who are, in essence, have grown up on TikTok, on Instagram, lesser to Facebook, and so they have no context to what happened back on 9/11. They don't understand that much of that note that Osama bin Laden wrote talked about living under Sharia law. And if this lady who saw this, who released this this letter, does she want to live under Islamic Sharia law? I know what it's like. I've covered it in the Middle East. They don't want to live. They don't want to live in a country like ours that would be turned into Islamic Sharia law. So no, I mean, I think it's just part of the narrative that's going on and has been going on for the last 20 years.
All right, George Thomas, CBN Senior International Correspondent. Thank you, George, and great reporting.
Thanks, George.
Thank you.
Well, many Israelis believe October 7th is the worst event in Jewish history since the Holocaust. They also feel the tragedy is bringing out the best in their people.
CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl shows us how they're stepping up to help those in need.
When Hamas attacked communities along the Gaza border October 7th, people escaped with almost no belongings. It didn't take long for Israelis from around the country to jump in and help.
The people of Israel now is in its best, and everybody takes part for effort to take care for us. The government, it's taken a lot of time for the government to act, but earlier the people is acting.
Nearly 1,000 residents of Be'eri community are staying at the David Hotel on the Dead Sea. This includes children who need activities and school. Inbal Bahar normally oversees preschool children up to age 3 in the Eshkol region. That includes her own kibbutz Be'eri, one of the hardest hit communities.
When we came to here, to Dead Sea, in the beginning, I thought that I have enough energy, to build all the kindergartens and all this. But very quick, I understood it. I'm not there. I'm not good for this project.
Then Israelis and organizations like Dror Israel and IsraAid joined in the effort.
They built us kindergartens from birth to 6 years old. And it took me something like 2.5 weeks to recover and to be able to wake up in the morning to do something, to want to awake in the morning.
Kindergarten teacher Ella Yalon left her home in central Israel to help.
We felt that with all the horrible things that happened to us here in Israel, I think most of the people in Israel wanted to do something. And when we saw this invitation, we understood as education people that this is the place we need to be right now.
One priority is getting children back to a regular routine.
We try to build a schedule that they know they come here in the morning, they go in the noontime. In the meanwhile, every day we do a circle that we sing, move a little bit, read stories.
They've also started a garden.
It's activity that bring the hope and thinking positively about the future, that something will grow.
Since 2001, IsraAid has responded to more than 100 disasters worldwide, and this is the first time they are working in their home country.
We are now working in over a dozen locations across Israel with displaced communities from the Gaza border region.
Shahar May says it became clear the first day they would need to launch an operation.
We run a child and parent space where children can engage in play under the supervision of trained mental health professionals. And we also handle the logistical support for the donation store. Many people left their homes with absolutely nothing, just the clothes on their back.
May says even though the Be'eri residents have suffered huge trauma and loss, they are pulling together.
Everything we do is in full partnership with the kibbutz itself, but the community itself, watching them come together and the resilience that is here in that community and all of the communities that we work with is incredible.
Dr. Alon Pauker, a Be'eri resident, says this sense also gives them the strength and will to rebuild, even if it takes 2 or 3 years to come up with a solution.
When you come as a community, you can rebuild the community.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, the Dead Sea, Israel.
Thank you, Julie. Well, Americans and especially Democrats are increasingly divided over U.S. support for Israel. 38% of Americans say Israel's military response to Hamas has gone too far. That's up from 26% in the weeks following the October 7th terror attack, according to a national NPR PBS Marist poll. 61% of all Americans are still more likely to sympathize with the Israelis than the 31% who sympathize with the Palestinians. Democrats, though, are split. 45% have greater sympathy for the Israelis, and 45% say their sympathies are more with the Palestinians. A reflection of that divide burst into violence last night at an anti-Israel rally outside the Democratic National Committee headquarters in Washington, D.C. At least 6 officers were injured, and Capitol Police made at least 1 arrest, evacuating the DNC during the violent protests.
Well, Nathan Gonzalez is the editor and publisher of Inside Elections, and he's also a Faith Nation contributor. Nathan, welcome to you. So what do you make of the latest NPR, PBS, and Marist polling that Jenna just mentioned? Are you at all surprised? 31% of Americans now feel more sympathy toward the Palestinians than the Israelis.
Yeah, first, I think if we zoom out, there is still a bipartisan majority coalition in this country that is still more sympathetic to Israel. I think what we're seeing is actually that some people are concerned with the loss of innocent life, no matter which side of the border you're on. And that, I guess you could take that as good news, that there might be some sympathy or empathy for that. Now, it's obviously complicated with Hamas using civilians and innocent people as human shields and all of that. But I think that's where folks are wrestling with what is the appropriate response to the attacks that happened on October 7th. And it's clear that there is more sympathy on the Democratic side, even though the Democratic Party is still divided.
Yeah, to your point, 45% of Democrats side more with the Palestinians. So far, Nathan, President Biden has been very strong in his support for Israel. But are the political winds shifting, or could they? And do you think that could change the calculus as we head into 2024?
Well, even though at maybe the secondary level, the Democratic Party is divided, President Biden is still the head of the Democratic Party, and I don't see his support wavering. He's trying to be a little more diplomatic than what some advocates of Israel want him to be, but I ultimately don't expect that to change. And I want to paint a little bit of a picture. You saw those violent protests and that interaction with Capitol Police last night. Some people who are outside of Washington and see those pictures, less than a half mile away, one of my kids was at Boy Scouts in the basement of a church. Another less than a half mile away in the other direction, there's soccer practice going on. And so while that is a very concerning incident, I think sometimes there's a feeling that, well, all of Washington, D.C. is on fire and that's everything. But it was still, we're talking about an isolated incident in a big city.
Thanks for painting D.C. as not just a trash city. Nathan, turning to the highs and lows of Capitol Hill. A high, Uncle Sam stays open for business after new House Speaker Mike Johnson muscled through his funding plan, but some major lows. One lawmaker threatening to fight a congressional witness, former Speaker McCarthy elbowing a member of his own party who voted to oust him. And Nathan, your thoughts on the bad behavior, especially for those lawmakers who identify as Christians?
It's silliness, John and Jen. Just what? It's just completely unnecessary. These are supposed to be grown adults, whether they're elected officials or not. And I was trying to explain this to my kids, and I had my 7-year-old ask me, well, where are your kidneys? What do your kidneys do? And they are They're like, what is happening? They're old enough to realize this is not acceptable behavior for anyone at any age. And so, and then on a political level, it's a distraction, right? This is another example of Republicans. The Republicans are bringing focus on themselves when they should be wanting to talk about President Biden or things that they feel are wrong with the country, and why Republicans are in better position to take more power and to be elected and to invoke some sort of change. And instead, we're talking about the silliness about who punched who or who what and who's going to fight who. It's just, it's silliness, John and Jenna.
Yeah. All right, Nathan, we have to leave it there, but thank you so much, Nathan. Nathan Gonzalez of Inside Elections.
Thanks, Nathan.
Good to see you guys.
Well, CBN News sits down with the senator who's single-handedly blocking all military promotions as his colleagues press to end his blockade. That and more in just 2 minutes. Well, the Senate made it official, preventing another looming government shutdown, sending a bill to keep the federal coffers flowing through the beginning of next year to the president's desk. Its passage coming just days before the deadline, Saturday at midnight. The measure keeps current spending levels for roughly 20% of the federal government through January 19th, funding the remaining 80% at current levels through February 2nd. Democrats in both the House and Senate supported the GOP measure.
Well, in the Senate, one senator is single-handedly blocking all military promotions.
Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville said he'll continue to hold up the promotions unless the Pentagon changes its policy on abortion. CBN Capitol Hill correspondent Matt Galka is here. Matt, some of Tuberville's fellow Republicans aren't hiding their frustrations.
Well, John and Jenna, some Republican senators say they agree with Tuberville that the policy needs to be changed, but that shouldn't mean hurting military personnel and their families. We spoke to the Alabama senator about it this week.
It punishes those brave service members who didn't develop the policy and can't change it.
We stand for life, but we also stand for other innocents, the innocent men and women who are serving in uniform today, continue to serve without advancement in their career fields while their families are hanging in the balance.
Senate Republicans went late into the night asking their fellow Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville to end his blockade on military promotions. The senator's objections have held up some 300 or so typically routine military promotions in the chamber. CBN spoke to Senator Tuberville this week about his ongoing effort.
I hate to have to hold these people kind of a hostage, but the American people deserve better than this. They deserve an administration that's going to listen and go by the Constitution.
The Alabama Republican has blocked the promotions for 9 months, maintaining it's his only tool to push the Pentagon to change its policy of paying travel expenses for service members who cross state lines to get an abortion. Some of his fellow Republicans say he's taking the wrong approach.
The policy is wrong, but holding these officers who had nothing to do with this is wrong. They deserve better.
Are you losing your own party on this?
No, not losing our own party. I mean, we got a strong party. We got some people that look at this situation different. They would hope that we would move on with this to give the 300 people a promotion. You got to remember, we're talking about a 2 million person military and 300 people. I keep hearing about how readiness. Okay, y'all tell me how I'm hurting readiness. The crickets, they can't tell you.
The Senate Rules Committee voted this week along party lines for a rule change to go around Tuberville's blockade.
I just believe this is one other example where we've got to get our act together, do the right thing.
Tuberville says he has the backing of some military personnel around the country and will continue to object until that rule comes to the floor.
Listen, again, I'm a team player, and I know we need a strong military, but we have to stand up in this country for what's right.
And if the resolution is brought to the floor, it would need 60 votes in order for the promotions to go through. Guys?
Matt, are there any other options they're working on?
Well, yes, and that's the preferred path for most Republicans instead of changing the rules. They're trying to work with Tuberville to stop his objection and instead try to change the Pentagon's abortion policy by suing the administration, something Tuberville told me earlier this week will probably end up happening. Jenna?
All right, Capitol Hill correspondent Matt Galka. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Matt. Coming up, the cost of gathering together to count your blessings. How much you might pay for this year's Thanksgiving dinner. Next.
Welcome back. The cost of your holiday meal could be a reason to give thanks. Thanksgiving dinner will be a little bit cheaper this year. According to the American Farm Bureau Federation, the average cost for a full Thanksgiving spread for 10 people will cost $61.17. That's down 4.5% from last year. The main reason, the cost of turkey.
I've seen turkey prices this week as low as 50 cents a pound, right, which is 50% or more cheaper than turkey prices last year.
According to the Associated Press, 95% of Americans plan to be eating turkey this time next week.
I'm not sure. $61?
Seems
Okay.
a little low.
Seems very low. Well, to the labor market, new unemployment applications are up, hitting a 3-month high. According to data today from the Labor Department, new jobless claims are up 13,000 from the previous week. Overall, about 231,000 Americans applied for new unemployment benefits. When it comes to continuing claims, those are up too. Today's numbers show about less than 2 million Americans are currently collecting unemployment. That marks a 7-month high for continuing claims. Many economists say, despite the recent rise, overall unemployment in America is still extremely low.
Celebrating a woman that keeps kids safe. That's next on Faith Nation. Finally tonight, a North Carolina woman spent her birthday doing what she loves, helping children cross the street safely.
For more than 30 years, Veda Keller has been a crossing guard at Wrightsboro Elementary School in North Carolina, including on her 90th birthday. It's been part of her morning and evening routines for more than 3 decades. On Monday, students showed their appreciation by showing up with flowers, a cake, and even a banner signed by all her school kids. Keller says a lot of former walkers now have kids of their own that she helps to cross the road now. It's something that makes her happy, and she has, get this, no plans to retire. Someone who clearly is beloved, and look at her go.
I know, I was commenting on how quickly she was walking. She's really spry. I think that might be part of the reason she has stayed so young.
Yeah.
That engagement, that purpose.
Keeping it moving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for watching Faith Nation.
Have a great evening.
And happy birthday, Veda.
Mm-hmm.